You're listening to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, aimed at helping photographers learn how to make the leap from amateur to pro. Hello and welcome to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, a joint effort brought to you by Photofocus and Skip Cohen University. This is Shmir Young, and I'm joined by my co-host and fellow creative influencer, Skip Cohen.
Ooh, today I am a fellow creative influencer.
Yes.
And I'm going to let everybody know publicly now that you have an obsession with emoticons and we're taking them away from you. So just to point that out, This is behind the scenes, everybody.
Right, the madness that happened before this.
Yeah. We've got a great program today, and I'm really excited about it. And if you're good with it, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our next guest.
Let's do it.
Actually, it's our only guest, so it's funny the way it came out just now. Our next guest. Luci Dumas joins us today, and although she's known for fine art photography and family work and children, I don't think there's anything she can't photograph. She's won awards. Most important of all, she's active in the industry. And for today's conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about her experience as a mentor and coach for so many photographers. Now, she's also a writer, an educator, and a podcaster. In fact, I was a guest on her podcast not too long ago, and what a kick it was to be able to spend some time with her on the Profitable Photographer podcast. We're going to talk about the trends that she's seeing in photographers who need help. And I know it's going to open the door to all kinds of things to talk about today. So, Luci, this is now the cue for your lips to move. Welcome to Mind Your Own Business.
Thank you, Skip and Shamira. This is sort of like getting to eat the biggest chocolate cake with no downside to it, being able to chat with both of you at the same time, because I'm super fans of both of you.
Well, thank you, because it all goes both ways. This is a fun industry. And you and I talked about it a little bit before the podcast we did on yours, that we all share so many friends within the industry. And it's almost like you could pick any one person and do the 3 degrees of separation Kevin Bacon game, starting with somebody like Tony Corbell and wind up, we all get connected. And I think that's one of the most fun things that I love about this industry that we're in.
I totally agree. And when people say, oh, I'm not joining PPA, there's nothing in it for me, or I'm not going to a convention, just like, you have no idea what support it is to make connections, to learn from other people, to make friends with people like you that I guess maybe we've known each other for 32 years. So yeah, being involved in the industry has lots of benefits.
I'm only 45. How could it be 32 years? All right, Shamira, get control of this podcast.
Oh, you met her when you were in single digits.
I had a crush on you in
third
elementary
grade,
school.
and Luci came to speak at my school.
Yes.
No, not hardly.
Oh, well, Luci, it's so cool to have you here. And, you're right. It feels like we're just a bunch of friends hanging out. Because we are, essentially. I mean, well, we absolutely are. And I've had you on my podcast, I lose count, maybe twice, 3 times, a number of times. And I've said it before on my show, and I'll say it here, that one of my favorite kinds of people to talk to are coaches and mentors to photographers. Because you have your finger on the pulse of what photographers are really struggling with to build their businesses. And so I know that today is going to be an absolutely juicy conversation. But first, I wanted to kick us off with our usual question that we like to start with so that our listeners can get to know a bit more about you and your background. So can you kind of give us an insight into your journey, your background info of how you ended up doing what you're doing today?
Sure. Let's see. I was born, just kidding. So part of how I think I managed to do well quickly in photography is that I was the editor of my yearbook in high school. I didn't do photography, but all of that visual experience, layouts, design, copywriting, editing, proof sheets, grew synapses in my brain that then when I picked up my first good camera, Minolta XG7, everything that came out of it was surprisingly very good. And when I found myself needing to reinvent my career, that everything pointed, just like the magic 8 ball, everything points to yes. so so I just did what I could a step at a time to grow a business. And I thought I had to already be successful to join the local chapter of PPA. So I wish I had joined sooner, because I know that instead of it taking 3 years to be fully profitable, would have happened much faster. Mm. And so I started, I believe in specializing. I love kids. I love weddings. I used to love weddings. Now I enjoy them as a guest. But I built my full-time career photographing weddings, probably did 500. And then I shifted and became the baby whisperer, the kid photographer in town, back when it wasn't popular. And most of the photographers in town were men. So they would send me the babies under 6 months because they didn't know what to do with them. And then eventually, as I matured, my client base, my family groups, the ages of children also grew. So now my bread and butter in photography is family portraits, and with children rather than children with the side order of families. And then maybe 5 years or so after having a very, very eye-opening health challenge, growth opportunity, I realized that reinventing my life and giving back in a more structured way was it was time. And so I started an official coaching business. I've always mentored and coached, probably even at 5. If I found a flavor of popsicle I liked, I probably, told all my friends just what I do. And so in the last 5 years, I've coached and mentored quite a few people and love watching people grow. It's almost like it happens to me when they're successful. So it's like it's selfish for me to help other people because I'm kind of an empath. So their success feels like mine, even though they get to keep the profits and so forth. So that's where I am today. And then the podcast idea so at the PPA convention this year, in January in Atlanta, I saw those 11,000 people, streaming down the escalators and up the escalators and standing room only in the business courses, and was just like hungry to figure out how can I reach more people and help more people, because I can help these people. And then when the idea of having my own podcast came up after having been on quite a few and enjoying that experience, I did the work to get that started. And it's so much fun. And it also helps me share other people's wisdom, so it doesn't all have to come from things that I know or intuit.
There's a line I've used a few thousand times by Alfred Lord Tennyson that just goes, "I am a part of all that I have met." And one of the things that we all do, and this is why it frustrates me, just like it does you when you hear a photographer who says, "Oh, PPA's got nothing for me," or "I don't need to go to this particular conference because I've heard all the speakers," or whatever stupid things people say. The reality is that we are all a part of everybody that we've met, and you never know when you're going to meet somebody, or you're going to be in a class, or you're doing something there that leads to something else on this journey we all call our careers.
Exactly.
And it frustrates the crap out of me when people won't go to a conference. I mean, you need to go to every conference you can. In fact, if there was one every quarter, I'd say just do it and go. And we all know that the bulk of everything happens in that January to April timeframe, because it's typically what everybody referred to as the slow season. but it's not the slow season in terms of your development. So I didn't mean to get on a soapbox, but um, boy, meeting people at conferences, finding ways to get help. Years ago, I had a discussion over lunch with Sarah Petty, and we were arguing over whether or not 95% or 98% of the photographers in this industry are horrible business people. And if you think about how silly that is, the reality is that, and I've said this for years, with the exception of doctors and the medical world, there is no group worse in business than artists. Yeah. And it's because everybody is a right brain creative, and they need to respect the left side of the brain and what it takes to run a business, which takes me right into where I want to segue of let's talk about some of the trends you're seeing with photographers who need help. And where are those areas that people seem to say, Lucy, I don't know what to do with blank?
So there's two, Skip. It's how to find clients and how to get money from their bank account into the photographer's bank account. A lot of times people think I'm not finding the right client. And that is true, that locating the ideal client, identifying and getting them to say yes is, of course, critical. But then many people can turn into amazing clients that purchase lots and lots of prints if they knew how to sell. So what I'm finding, which is exciting, is the trend of shoot and burn, which I don't know if that is considered an insult or just a fact, but people photographing and handing over the digital files, the avalanche tidal wave of people that were doing that I experienced at a WPPI convention probably 7 years ago was just like, whoa, this is a whole new generation. So many of them are realizing I cannot make a living doing it this way and remain healthy and sane and creative. So the trend I'm seeing is people wanting to learn how to actually sell products, wall portraits, books, other memory boxes, and so forth, which is exciting. At that PPA convention, there were many more business classes than other times, and they were standing room only, which I don't know if you remember when you could shoot a Canon, Skip, through a business class, but all the ones on photography and Photoshop and anything, more fun and creative was packed. So that's a trend I see is photographers getting it, that they have to run a profitable business and they have to sell. Well, they don't have to, but want to know how to actually meet with clients and sell them archival portraits that will be passed down for generations. That's a trend I see.
Well, I know from the old days, and the old days weren't that long ago, but if you go back, just go back 12, 15 years ago, I'd get 10 people in a marketing program, and I used to kid my good buddy Don Blair because he'd have 350 people standing room only doing posing and lighting and cute brides and couples because everybody wanted to learn the skill set. Now I think people are starting to realize what good is it creating the greatest images of your life if you can't sell them and nobody knows who you are. So we're talking about raising the bar here from macaroni and ramen noodles every night to taking your family out for a steak now and then.
Right. I just thought of something, Skip. Because cameras give us instant feedback and we're not paying $1 every time we click the shutter, which is pretty much when I used a Hasselblad, I always thought, don't click unless you know for sure you've got it, because that's $1 out of my pocket. So maybe part of that shift away from the classes on how to take pictures is because it's easier to become a competent photographer with digital cameras because you get that feedback.
You know, that's absolutely true. As we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking of all the past mistakes I've made, and I make no secret about that on the show. When Skip mentioned how did you put it? The macaroni and ramen noodle menu.
That's right.
And that totally rang a bell for me. And you're right, Lucy. You know, you do get that instant feedback when you get a new piece of gear and you can see your image right when you click the shutter. But what I'm seeing is that what really makes or breaks a photographer's business is knowing whether they know the business side or not. And especially selling can be huge. And I just kind of wanted to briefly have us unpack that a little bit, because I think selling is a general term. Many of our listeners may be thinking of the selling process happening after the photo session, like one little self-contained event. But really, I would argue that the selling process begins the first time you interact with a client, and the second time, and the third time is you get them prepared for the shoot. So I just wanted to ask, with all the coaching that you do, what are some, I guess, basic tips to help our listeners get started thinking about changing the way they approach selling? Just basic tips to get them started.
So selling is actually my superpower.
Ah,
and
perfect.
My first memory of selling something I created is I walked around the block. I was maybe 7. I couldn't cross the street, but I was allowed to walk around the block. And I picked the neighbor's flowers. And then I went home and tied them into little bouquets and walked back around the block, knocking on doors, selling them these little bouquets. I didn't know that God didn't plant the flowers. I had no idea that actually the people in the houses planted those. So point is, I've always thought that creativity into cash was a good thing. As I've coached, I've analyzed what it is that I have done in the 37 years in this business and what I am teaching my clients. And I realized the overall concept is to become the client's trusted advisor. Get myself into a leadership position, starting with making friends with them, getting them to like me, the classic know, like, and trust. And a little bit at a time, getting them to follow my lead. So that to me is why the phone is as important as the camera, because it is very hard to become that trusted advisor with emails and texts and Facebook messaging and so forth. So when I get on the phone, I also get them emotionally connected to who it is they want photographed, even if it's themselves. I start asking them some questions that that kind of have them tap into the love that's there. And by asking those questions, people love to have people listen to them and ask them about themselves. So I start that connection, and then once they are interested in meeting with me for consultation, I give them some guidance and some homework about photographing the interior of their home, which is planting those seeds for purchase.
Yes.
So that then when we get together, I just expand on all of that and give advice on anywhere from what to wear, and we're picking locations to things like, if your child's a brat on the way to the session, don't yell or punish them. Kids usually are bratty because it's high stress to get ready for a session. And if they show up upset, it is much harder for me to get them to smile and have a good time. So I'm advising. I'm like every kid's Aunt Lucy. That's the position I take. But but the Y is like Auntie Mame, the guide, the friend, teacher. And even when I photograph with the sale in mind. I make sure I have a lot of variety, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of emotional, it's not all smiles. It's not all looking at the camera. So that then when I'm in the sales room, they've been prepared for purchase. They've thought about where art might be displayed. And then I have a system that I teach on exactly, I think I have 8 or 9 steps to making those photographs turn into money and wall portraits and photo albums. So yes, it's a whole step-by-step system.
I want to go back to something that you hit on in the very beginning of that statement about talking to people and the telephone. Somebody sent me an article the other day that talked about the fear that millennials, and I guess they're also called postmillennials, in other words, born 97 and later, and the fear they have of actually having a conversation over the phone. It just blew me away to even read this, because we've got the phone here, and I will be the first to admit and be proud of the fact that I am an old fart. And I love picking up the phone. I use it on social media all the time. Somebody will write something that is really nice, or it meant a lot to me, or maybe it was something I don't agree with. And I'll see it on Facebook, for example. And if they're in the U.S., odds are they're going to get a call from me. If they're outside the country and we're really into crazy time zones, they might just get an IM from me. And looking for another way we can talk, or maybe we'll Skype later on. But the reality is that the best way to be able to sell is either in person, if you've got them right there, because all of you guys as photographers, you are your brand. You're the whole marketing team all packaged into one, and people are hiring you. You've already got the credibility of a skill set as a professional photographer, but they're hiring you out of trust and a belief that you can capture the kinds of images they want. And that second tool, second only to actually being there face to face, is the phone and talking to people and building your database. I mean, you were talking about photographers that are, how do you find new clients? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I absolutely believe that tons of photographers out there have forgotten about their own databases. And you're out looking for new clients, but what about recontacting the old one? I mean, mom's getting older, the kids are growing up. It's time for new family portrait.
So, Skip, I have a good friend who will remain nameless that is very, very successful. And I ask him, do you send holiday cards? Do you send postcards? Do you have a database where you send friendly emails? Do you call your clients? Do you take them to lunch? How do you stay in touch with past clients? And he said, we don't. And I was flabbergasted, because he's missing out on, and I will admit I'm not perfect at that, but I definitely have kept a good contact list and stayed in touch. And I'm sure you know Jeff Lubin.
Absolutely.
Yes. So he had a program at the Wall Portrait Conference back when our darling Ken Whitmire was still on the planet. And in it, he talked about ways to get dollars coming through the door when you're having a follow. I love the word follow, FALLOW time, like when the fields there's nothing growing or doesn't look like it, but how to get the phone ringing. And he said, call your past clients, think of a reason to call. And he had a whole breakdown of, you could be doing a fundraiser, you could be updating your client list, a reason to call that's not a sales pitch. And one of my really good friends, she calls her ideal clients at least every 6 months to say hello, and takes at least 3 people out to lunch or dinner were meeting for coffee every month. And so she had to market half as much as everyone else in San Diego because she created this loyal base of the ideal clients. So I totally agree with that.
I'm not going to give out the name of the photographer here, but I did a podcast with somebody years ago who is a very successful family photographer who already figures out every year she needs X number of sittings to pay for everything from her lifestyle to her business, and knows exactly how many return clients she's going to have. And it's somewhere around, she's got a 65% retention rate. So for example, she's got to do 150 sittings in the year based on her average income, revenue, whatever, to take care of all of her costs and make a living. Then she knows exactly how many new clients she's got to find. And it blows me away. I mean, I've got an old friend up in New Hampshire who to this day does not have a website. In his small town, that works. But for the other 99.9% of photographers out there, I believe you need a website. I believe you need a blog. And I believe you need to know how to sell and how people can contact you. And that's where just about everybody else is. And you're right. There are some out there that don't bother to stay in touch with their clients. Although I remember years ago, David Zeiser talking about how on the first anniversary of every bride and groom, if they're within like a 50 to 100 mile radius, he would contact them, wish them happy anniversary, and say, I love doing your wedding. It's time for us to do an anniversary portrait, and he'd do a free sitting. And the younger the bride, the more friends she's got, and the amount of goodwill that came out of that one little marketing endeavor was unbelievable, because we are a word of mouth business.
Right. One of my, and it may have been David that passed this on, when we've been around a while, we forget where things actually came from sometimes. But someone was teaching the idea of when you deliver a wedding album, having 3 gift certificates. And they use one for the first anniversary, one for their first baby, and one for an extended family portrait session, multi-generation. So it's telling them, I want to become your lifetime photographer. I want to stay in touch. If I could do anything over in my career, it would have been to establish much more of lifetime connection with my wedding clients. At the time, I was so focused on weddings that I didn't think about how to turn those clients into children and family portrait business.
Well,
so, yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm going to take part of the credit for that, because 20 years ago, I was talking about the image box, and I was suggesting that you guys put a gift certificate in there. And if it was if you're using the image box and you were doing maternity or baby, you do the exact same certificates of first day of school. I mean, you'd go through the child's life so that certificate was always sitting there. And I remember talking about it, especially with wedding photographers, because my whole pitch has been, why shouldn't you latch on to a family in the same way most of us stay with the same doctor if you stayed in the same community? Why not be a family's photographer to be there to capture all those events? So, and I don't know where I got it from. We all could have gotten it from somebody like David.
Yes. So I have a client who has 6 children, and I've done all their first communions. I've done all but one of their senior portraits. I've done 3 family portraits, 1 wedding. They were going to fly me to Switzerland in January for a wedding, but what I really would need to charge for going to Europe in January was just a little outside of their comfort zone. But they hired me to find a photographer, and I'm going to do the editing and creating the books for them. So I'm still involved. And think of the income that I've had. And this woman always knows what she wants. and she never quibbles about money, and it's always a $3,000 or $4,000 sale, sometimes more. So, the lifetime value of this, the loyalty and the relationship that we built, and I'm sure from the start I was her trusted advisor. I just didn't have a name for it. So yeah, the value of those lifetime clients, you just can't you can't put a price on that. But also the joy of like, oh, I photographed this little girl when she was 7, and now she's 27 and she's a new mom, and I'll be photographing her baby, and did her wedding in Hawaii. And yeah, there's just, those are the juicy desserts of being in business a long time and maintaining those relationships.
Well, I know we're just about out of time. I wanted to jump in with one quick question before Shamira hits you with one of our favorites.
Okay.
One of the things we talked about before we started was the importance of photographers who need help asking for it. There are too many people out there with way too much self-pride, feeling that everything has got to be a DIY project. And there are so many places that people can get help, ask for help. You talked about PPA and Imaging USA. I mean, we do this podcast once a month with guests who are offering help. Throw in there one sentence on what you think photographers need to do when it comes to asking for help.
If we think about life in general, everything we've done, we've had somebody help us learn it. I don't know, maybe learning to say dada. Everybody figures that out on their own. But there is no business that can survive without help, because there's so many shortcuts. You can make all the mistakes you possible on your own, or you can reach out to help and save yourself a ton of time and energy and frustration and the possibility of failure. So in everything in life, it's always better and easier when we have a community that supports us and cheers us on and gives us a little, wake up call when we need it. So, yeah, I think it's everything. I cannot imagine that there's one photographer in the world who learned from nobody and was highly successful, even if it's.
I'm sorry, you hit on the magic word. The word is community.
Yep.
That's the magic word. Everybody out there needs to remember you are part of an amazing community where we all watch each other's backs. We're all there to help. And that includes the three of us right now on this podcast and why we're doing this. And it's an opportunity for you to grow. And there is no such thing ever as a stupid question. Now, there may be some really bad, dumb answers, but there's no such thing as a stupid question.
No. Can I add one more thing, Skip?
Of course. Sorry.
So, well, I didn't think of it until your follow-up. So the other thing is, it's important to give. It's important to share. One of the things I love about my local PPA group, the Professional Photographers of San Diego County, is the culture is one of sharing, of one of where there's no fear, no secrets, nothing that people hold back from someone else because they're afraid that they'll learn their secrets and tricks and then take something away from them. Because I find that people with a giving spirit receive more than they could possibly give. You can't outgive anything. So, if you have fear that by sharing this, it's going to hurt you, I just want people to know it doesn't. Because I love a quote that I put in my high school yearbook. So we're coming back full circle. On the teacher section, we had quotes, and the quote was, "Each day I learn more than I teach." So I do think that a part of how I've been able and y'all have been able to have the success that we have is because we share with others, and that means we grow and grow and grow as a result of that.
You know, this is really cool, Lucy. And as you were talking, it brought to mind, if this is a quote, I can't remember who said it. I may be butchering it, but I heard it said, and I've said it before, that it's about collaboration, not competition. Mm-hmm. And there's certainly enough to go around. And when we all help each other, that improves the industry as a whole. You know, imagine if photographers all over the world knew how to successfully make sales in their business and be that authentic, trusted advisor and just have a business that is healthy and robust. That would certainly help the rest of us. And so, all that to say, this has been really cool. The time flew by. Unfortunately, we have to wrap things up. But, Lucy, I know you mentioned before we started this interview that you have a special offer you wanted to make to our listeners. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. So I would love to offer the first 8 of your listeners an opportunity to have a rich one-on-one conversation with me. I like to call it Create the Business of Your Dreams strategy session. And if you'd like to go to lucidumascoaching.com or lucy@lucidumas.com, get in touch, say yes, please on an email, or I'd like a strategy session. I'll send you a link. We can chat. We can find out if it's appropriate for where you are at this point in your business. And I know Shamira has had that call, and we had a really great conversation.
It was very cool.
Would love to do that for your listeners.
It was very cool. Thank you, Lucy. It opens up the mind to the possibilities. And you know, when you're building a business, you have to get creative a lot of times. Just like when you're creating great photos, you get creative. The same with the business. So we appreciate that offer. And I know you mentioned your website, but I just wanted to make sure and ask one more time, where can folks find you in general to find out what you're up to?
My business page is lucidumascoaching.com, Lucy with an I. My photography page is lucidumas.com, and you can send me a direct email to lucy@lucidumas.com. Isn't that clever? I just put my name in everywhere, so easy to find.
I like that consistency.
You can skywrite, you can send a carrier pigeon. You can definitely find me on Facebook.
Fantastic. And Skip, I want to make sure and ask, where can folks find you?
Well, I read the same manual on contact information that Lucy did because I'm Skip Cohen everywhere. Everything I write is on skipcohenuniversity.com. My email is skip@mei500.com, and we always encourage our listeners to give us feedback and any requests for any information that you'd like us to work on. It might be in the form of a guest or a topic for an upcoming podcast. And I'm Skip Cohen on Twitter and Skip Cohen on Facebook. Nothing fancy there. Lucy and I are cut from the same cloth on just make it simple and use your name. And Shamira, as always, where are they going to go to find you?
Folks can send me an email at shamira@photofocus.com. That's my first name, CHAMIRA @photofocus.com. Send us your questions, your ideas, your feedback. We love hearing that stuff because it absolutely shapes how we move forward with this show. And we love doing this show. With that said, Lucy, we want to thank you again. This has just been really cool.
Lucy, you shared a lot of great information. So sure do appreciate you taking the time and all the things you do to give back to this industry.
You're welcome. It just makes my heart happy and explode with joy to share this with you guys and with your listeners.
Okay, but when you explode with joy, don't use emoticons.
No. Oh no.
I'm on a personal campaign here.
Oh. Now I'm tempted to find an exploding emoticon if that even exists. Oh, this is great. And we also want to thank our listeners for joining us. Please tell your friends about this podcast, especially if they have the burning desire to bring their photography business up to the next level. We look forward to having you all with us next time on the Mind Your Own Business podcast, brought to you by Photofocus and Skip Cohen University.